What if I told you that the most powerful weapon in history was not the sword, nor fire, nor the great engines of war, but a forgotten melody? What if, to break open the strongest prison, you did not need to use force, but had to awaken a buried memory with music? This is not a fairy tale. This is the epic of a fallen empire, written not with blood, but with tears and a song with the power to make stone itself weep. We are about to journey back in time together, to a forgotten land, to witness a battle unlike any other, a battle where victory belonged not to the stronger warrior, but to the one who could remember who they truly were. But before we step into the story of the fall of the fortress of Azmar, tell me something. Where are you listening to this story from, and what time is it for you? Leave a comment below. Let me know where the footprint of our story has reached on this globe, connecting our souls who are listening at this very moment. Now let the story begin. Across a barren wasteland that stretched to the horizon like an endless scar under a scorching sun, the Elara people were on the move. They looked less like an army and more like a river of broken souls. Centuries of slavery had eroded them, not just on their skin, but deep within their psyche. The trauma of the whip and the shackle had left invisible scars, creating a people riddled with doubt, fear, and a self-loathing that had settled deep into their bones. Though they were free, their souls were still bound in the prison of their past. Leading them was Kaelen, a man who carried the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders. His eyes did not hold the pride of a general, but the weariness of a father trying to rally his lost children. He looked at his followers, their gaunt faces, their slumped shoulders, and he knew that their greatest enemy was not in front of them, but lived inside of them. Despair was an invisible foe, yet more potent than any blade. And then, on the horizon, it appeared, Azmar. The fortress was not built of just stone. It was built of the pain and humiliation of their ancestors. Every single block on those towering walls seemed to be mixed with the sweat and tears of generations of Elara people. Azmar was not just a city. It was a stone behemoth, a symbol of the power that had once crushed them, a constant reminder of their enslavement. To the world, Azmar was an impenetrable fortress, but to the Elara, it was the tomb of their honor. Kaelen knew that with their crude weapons, a direct assault was suicide, but there was another path, a path that God himself had shown him, a path that required not strength, but something far more difficult to find among a broken people: faith. The battle for Azmar would not be a conquest. It had to be a healing. But how do you heal thousands of people who have come to believe they are no longer worthy of being healed? That was the first and highest wall Kaelen had to face. While Kaelen and his people confronted the wall of despair from the outside, deep within the belly of the beast that was Azmar, another flame was flickering. In a small, grimy, damp alley where sunlight rarely reached, stood a modest house. Its owner was Elara. To all of Azmar, she was just a courtesan, a name tied to contempt and whispers behind her back. Her life was a sentence of disgrace, an existence on the fringes of society. But Elara carried a secret far greater than her shame. She was the last descendant of an Elara bloodline that had been trapped when Azmar fell centuries ago. While the outside world saw only a fallen woman, inside her, a legacy was being desperately preserved. They were the ancient songs, melodies of the glory and history of the Elara people that her grandmother had sung to her as a child. Those songs were the only thread connecting her to her roots, to a stolen identity. Every night after the clients had left, in the silence of her small room, Elara would hum those melodies, not for entertainment, but so she would not forget who she was. As fate would have it, 2 of Kaelen's spies sent into the city to find a weakness found no cracks in the fortress walls. Instead, they heard rumors of the Keeper of the Melody, a courtesan who knew songs that no one else in Azmar knew anymore. Following the whispers, they found their way to Elara's home. Their arrival pushed Elara to a fateful crossroads. Her heart pounded in her chest. For the first time in years, she saw people of her own blood, but the joy was quickly replaced by overwhelming fear. To help them meant death. To betray them, she could continue to live her quiet life of humiliation. That night, news of the spies reached the cruel commander of Azmar. Guards stormed Elara's house, their banging on the door like the hammer of a death sentence. "Surrender the traitors!" Elara faced the greatest choice of her life. In that moment, the image of her grandmother came to her mind, her warm singing voice and her words. "Never let this melody die, Elara. It is our soul." With a courage she did not know she possessed, Elara hid the two spies under flax stalks on her roof. She calmly faced the guards, lying that the men had already left, and pointed them in the wrong direction. When the danger had passed, under the silver moonlight, she climbed onto the roof. With tears in her eyes, she looked at the two men and said, "I know of your God. I have heard the stories. I believe he will give this land back to our people." Then she made a bold request. "Swear to me now before your God that when Azmar falls, you will spare me and my family." Moved by her faith, the spies agreed. They gave her not gold, but something far more precious, a single scarlet cord. "Tie this cord to your window. This will be the sign of the covenant. Anyone inside the house with this cord will be safe." That scarlet cord was no ordinary object. It was the last memento her grandmother had given her, woven from threads her ancestors had carried since ancient times. As Elara tied the cord to her window frame, it was not just an act of self-preservation. It was an act of reclamation. She was reclaiming her identity. The bright red cord stood out against the gray stone of the fortress wall like a drop of blood-red hope, a silent challenge to an entire empire. After helping the spies escape, Elara looked at the cord, and for the first time in years, she did not feel like a spurned courtesan. She felt like a daughter of the Elara. When the spies returned and recounted the story of Elara and her faith, a fragile hope spread through the Elara camp. Kaelen felt encouraged. This was the sign he had been waiting for. But the next instruction God gave him was an even greater test. The plan was not to attack, not to shout, not to use force. The plan was a spiritual ritual. He was to have the priests carry the ancient relics of their people at the front, and the entire nation was to march around the walls of Azmar for 6 days in silence. On the 7th day, they were to stop and do something no army had ever done before a battle. They were to sing. They were to sing the song of their homeland, the melody they had almost forgotten. When Kaelen announced this plan, a deathly silence fell over the camp, followed by a murmur that erupted into a wave of fierce resistance. The warriors, men who had lost their families to the Azmar Empire, men who bore scars on their bodies and in their hearts, felt humiliated. An old warrior named Malak, who had lost all 3 of his sons in a failed uprising years before, stepped forward to face Kaelen. His face was a mask of pain and fury. "Sing?" His voice was hoarse. "Kaelen, we have bowed our heads in silence for centuries. We have endured their insults. Now you want us to sing for them like performing slaves? Is this God's plan, or is it your cowardice?" Malak's words were like a match to the powder keg of their collective trauma. The conflict was no longer between the Elara and the fortress of Azmar. It was now a conflict within their own ranks. On one side was Kaelen trying to cling to an irrational faith. On the other was a wounded nation who only believed in what they could see and touch. And that was the strength of their enemy and their own weakness. "Faith cannot sharpen our swords," another shouted. "A song cannot break stone." Kaelen stood there, weathering the storm of their anger. He did not argue. He just looked deep into Malak's eyes and said, his voice low and steady, "The highest wall is not the one standing before us, Malak. It is the one inside each of our hearts. If we cannot break the wall of our own doubt and hatred, then those stones will stand forever. Give God a chance. Give ourselves a chance." The first day of the march began in a heavy silence of inner turmoil. The Elara walked, not with the discipline of an army, but with the reluctance of condemned men. Their feet dragged through the dust. The camera pans across their faces, a young mother clutching her child, silent tears streaming down her cheeks, a young man gripping the useless hilt of his sword, his eyes filled with rage, and Malik, the old warrior, walking with slumped shoulders, his face a mask of defeat. From atop the fortress walls, the Azmar guards jeered at first. They threw scraps of food and hurled insults. "Look at the pathetic slaves! Do they plan to walk until the walls fall down on their own?" But then the second day passed, and the third. The silence of the Elara began to take on a strange weight. It was not the silence of fear, it was a purposeful, haunting silence. The laughter from the walls dwindled, replaced by confusion. What was this bizarre ritual? What were they doing? By the fifth and sixth days, there was no more laughter. A palpable anxiety spread through the fortress. The markets were empty, the windows shuttered. The guards stood frozen on the walls, their eyes fixed on the endless, eerie procession below. The silence of the Elara was now more terrifying than any battle cry. They did not know that beneath that silence, a transformation was taking place. Each step, each circle around the city was an agonizing act of obedience. And in that obedience, the icy walls in the hearts of the Elara people began to show their first cracks. The stage was set. The tension was stretched to its breaking point. Both sides, inside and out, were holding their breath, waiting for the seventh day. As the dawn of the seventh day broke, painting the horizon a blood red, the atmosphere in the Elara camp was completely different. The turmoil of the past 6 days had crystallized into a quiet acceptance. Today was the day that everything would change, one way or another. Kaelen stood among his people, his face calm but his eyes burning with an intense focus. The priests carried the ancient relics into position with a reverence they had never shown before. The entire Elara nation stood facing the walls of Azmar, their ancient enemy. From the ramparts, the guards watched with an unconcealed dread. They had not slept all night. This strange ritual was about to reach its climax, and no one knew what would happen. Kaelen did not draw his sword. He took a deep breath. He did not look at the stone wall before him. He looked into the faces of his people, faces that had once been etched with pain and despair, but now held a fragile glimmer of hope. He did not shout a battle command. He uttered a command far more powerful. For a moment, only silence answered. The skepticism of centuries was not easily broken. But then, from a small corner, a trembling, faint voice rose. It was the voice of the young mother, the one who had wept on the first day. She began to sing the song of their homeland, the melody her own mother had sung to her as a lullaby. That melody, like a single drop of water on a still lake, sent out ripples. A few other voices, hesitant, began to join in. Then more and more. The soldiers, the craftsmen, the elderly. Malak, the old warrior, stood frozen at first, his lips pressed into a thin line. But as the familiar melody washed over him, filling his mind with images of his lost sons, of a homeland he had never known, he felt his eyes blur. And then, from deep within his chest, a sound escaped. He was singing. The singing grew stronger, from a whisper of hope into a magnificent chorus of an entire nation. It was not a song of anger, but of release. Every note was a tear shed. Every lyric was a shackle broken. They were not singing for their enemies. They were singing for themselves. They were singing to reclaim their own souls. That song, carrying the pain of generations, now transformed into an unimaginable power. And then, the impossible happened. From within the walls of Azmar, a low, deep sound began to resonate. Not the sound of cracking, it was the sound of a moan. Inside her house, Lyra was also singing. When she heard the chorus from outside, she had joined her voice to it, and her melody, clear and powerful, soared over the rooftops. The song of the Elara had found a resonance. The secret that only Lyra's ancestors knew, the secret buried with the city's history, was the very structure of the walls. They were built from a special resonant stone, a type of stone that could absorb and amplify emotion. Centuries of oppression, fear, and violence had made the stones hard and brittle. But the melody of the song, a melody of anguish, of longing, and of pure faith, had touched their core resonant frequency. The walls did not explode. They began to weep. From the crevices between the stones, streams of water began to leak, carrying dust and green moss with them. The massive stones began to vibrate, not from an external force, but as if they were writhing from within. A mineral wail rose up, a sound both tragic and majestic. The great walls, the symbol of oppression, were not destroyed by force. They were melted by the power of a pain that had been released. They collapsed inward, not in a terrifying explosion, but like a giant slowly falling to its knees, surrendering to the power of a song. The fall of Azmar was not an act of war, it was an act of redemption. When the dust settled, an unprecedented sight was revealed. The city of Azmar lay exposed. The Elara soldiers, still in a state of shock, stormed in, but the massacre that everyone had feared did not happen. Inside, Lyra and her family, protected within the safety of the house with the scarlet cord, waited with bated breath. And then the two spies arrived, keeping their promise, and led her and her family out. But when Lyra stepped outside, she did not see a city engulfed in flames. She saw something even more astonishing. Many doors of the common people of Azmar had been opened. They were not holding weapons. Some were crying. Some looked at the Elara people with fear, but also with curiosity and a hint of relief. The cruel ruling class of Azmar had not only oppressed the Elara, but their own people as well. The tragic song of the Elara had not only broken down the stone walls, it had reached through the walls in the hearts of the oppressed commoners of Azmar, who also yearned for freedom. The collapse did not just come from the outside, it was aided by empathy from within. The victory of the Elara was not an occupation, it was a dual liberation. They not only freed themselves from the trauma of their past, but they also freed others from the oppression of the present. In the days that followed, Azmar was not renamed with a triumphant title. Kaelen declared that it would be a city of the healed, a place where all who had been oppressed could call home. Lyra, with the scarlet cord still tied to her wrist, was no longer a shunned courtesan. She became a symbol of reconciliation, a bridge between the returning Elara and the remaining people of Azmar. Faith had saved her life, and now her obedience to her ancestral heritage was helping to build a new future. The final image of the story is not of Kaelen standing on the ramparts with a victory flag. The final, most powerful image is of Lyra sitting in the middle of a circle of children. There are Elara children and Azmar children, and she is teaching them to sing. She is teaching them the ancient song, the melody that once tore down walls. But now it was no longer a song of pain. It had become a song of hope, a song of unity, a melody no longer used to break, but to build. To build bridges, to build understanding, and to build a new community from the ashes of the past. In each of our souls there is a forgotten song, and there are walls of trauma, of fear, of inadequacy. What is your song? What is the name of your wall? Write the name of that wall in the comments below. Call it by its name, and let us, together, raise the melody of faith and watch it begin to tremble. Just as the song of the Elara found resonant souls, if this story has resonated with you and you wish to continue this journey of discovering stories of world-changing faith, make sure you do not miss the next melody. Take a moment to press the subscribe button and the bell icon next to it. Every single subscription is not just a number. It is another voice joining the chorus of our channel, so that our voices can rise together, stronger, and break down the walls of silence. Thank you for listening.